All right, and we're just waiting on a few more members here, so hopefully we'll get started right on time, if not just a minute after. But thanks to everyone who is here so far. All right, I needed to resend the Zoom call information to Ms. Ortega, who should be joining us in just a minute here.
We can go ahead and wait for her, Parker.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we have Estella in the call. Mr. Chair, it's off to you.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Parker. And thank you everybody for joining us here for our second meeting of this group. The first item on our agenda is the chair's report. I'm going to take just a second to do an overview of the agenda as it stands. I believe, Parker, the agenda was circulated prior to the meeting, yes?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so I'm going to do a brief overview of the entire agenda, and then I'm going to make a motion at that point to amend the agenda. So first, there's going to be the chair's report, where we're going to approve the meetings of the minutes of the last meeting, as well as take care of a couple of other housekeeping matters. The second thing on the agenda is we're going to review the background report that was also distributed in advance to committee members that was prepared by Lisa from Central Staff before we even started the undertaking of this project and this committee to discuss these topics around protecting, expanding, and enhancing our performance auditing, that talks about a lot of the different subject areas that serve as kind of the basis of the work plan that this group is going to be putting together. And there will be questions and comments on that material as well as an overview of it. Then we're going to go on to considering sort of the specific benefits and challenges of performance audits. We're going to have a slide deck as part of our PowerPoint that will help all of us keep track of the conversation and kind of building out the different things that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks before ultimately consolidating everything and writing a report of our findings. So that is what I have for now. I am going to add one thing. One of the housekeeping measures we need to do is to elect a vice chair of the task force or the committee on performance auditing. That was not formally added to the agenda. So at this time, if there is no objection, I want to make a motion to add election of vice chair to the agenda. Okay, hearing no objection, I will add election of vice chair to the agenda under the chair's report category. So with that, I think we can just start to move along and start taking care of the business under the chair's report so we can get into the presentation by Lisa and Parker. I'm going to start by, at this point, asking generally, well, actually, before I ask generally for nominations for vice chair, I want to take this opportunity to nominate Cheryl Broom, the former King County Auditor, for the position. I think that given her experience and background, and that she was the auditor of a jurisdiction that overlaps with the city of Seattle, I think that she would be a good fit to serve in that position. So I'm going to nominate Cheryl Broom for consideration for that position. I do want to open it up to ask if anyone else on the call here would be interested in making a nomination for another member. People can nominate themselves. I want to be clear of that based on the rules that we did previously approve. So at that point, if anyone wants to unmute yourself and make a nomination for vice chair, I would entertain those nominations now. Okay, no other nominations for vice chair. So with that, I would call for a vote on the only person that's been nominated, who is Cheryl Broom. All those in favor, I can see everyone's picture here. All those in favor of Cheryl Broom as vice chair signify by raising your hand. Okay, I'll call that unanimous. So Cheryl Broom is hereby the vice chair of this committee. Thank you, everybody, for that quick and for the record, I don't see that anybody did not raise their hand. So I'll say that is a unanimous decision of those present. So if there is no objection, the minutes of the last meeting were circulated. So I would ask if there's any objection to approval of the meeting notes as were distributed previously. If you have an objection, unmute yourself. And if you have an objection or clarification, this would be the time to state it to the previous meeting notes. Okay, seeing none, the notes from the previous meeting are approved and adopted. um, by acclamation. At this point, before we move on to the presentation, I want to open the floor to go to the order items. I'll start as the chair and just say that I have received some emails from committee members expressing interest in some of the subjects that were raised at the last meeting, which has been great. I definitely invite anyone to email myself, Parker, or Lisa if there's any areas of interest that you want to explore in the future to shape future agendas. In addition to our normal work plan, we do have kind of some space in sort of the chair's report category to entertain slight but related diversions if people get an idea or something comes up that they want to dive into or pursue deeper. And it's been really good to see that interest coming from different board members to elicit materials around current practices around incorporating race and social justice, considerations around equity, practices for how we identify the current auditing annual work plan from our two auditing offices at the city. And those inquiries are great and have really been helpful in shaping today's conversation and conversations going forward. So I just want to make it clear that there's an expectation for me that if those kind of things are coming up and there's something that might warrant kind of a for the good of the order, presentation or slight detour to provide more context to some of the things we're talking about. That is certainly, or if there's additional supplemental materials that you want to get your hands on early and more quickly than waiting for the next meeting to formally request them, my door is super open to accommodate that, and we've been able to do that as those requests have come in. That's the only report that I have at this time, but I want to open it up if anyone else has any other housekeeping things, good of the order matters before we go deeper into the agenda. And folks can signify by raising their hand or just unmuting and speaking up. Okay, it looks like we're ready to go. So Lisa in central staff for the council prepared a really great memo that looked at some other jurisdictions, including Levon, Portland, Oregon, that was discussed, kind of from an outsider perspective, because none of us, in the city of Seattle have worked in the Portland Auditor's office, but we also looked at, San Francisco, Nashville, a bunch of other jurisdictions and cities, looked at some of the things that that we currently do, looked at what King County does across the street, and we figured that for our first kind of full meeting of jumping into things, that would be a good point to start and to really kind of go over some of the research and considerations that have formed the core of what has resulted in creating this committee to get some broader perspective and really flesh out the work that we started on the second floor of Seattle City Hall and see if we can move it further along. So with that, I want to turn it over to Lisa. I would ask that, it's not like a terribly long PowerPoint, so I'd ask that people maybe make a note at certain points if there's questions, comments, concerns that arise from the material in it. And then we'll go back and we'll have a round of questions and comments. Comments are super appreciated at this point. It doesn't just need to be questions. Like, most of you are here explicitly for your comments. So once we get through the PowerPoint, I think that I'll facilitate a discussion on maybe going back, covering some things. I'm particularly interested from folks that are here from other jurisdictions that can kind of flesh out and provide commentary on what some of our impressions were that we put into this memo of those jurisdictions as outsiders. So with that, I want to turn it over to Lisa and just get us rolling today. Lisa, I think you're muted. Looks like you're still muted there, Lisa. Oh, there, it looks like it's off now.
Okay, can you hear me now? It's saying I'm muted by host. Can you hear me? How's that? Now can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
There.
Great.
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Just momentarily terror there, that's fine. Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate the time to be able to go over this background report really briefly, and it's very exciting to have people from a couple of the jurisdictions, several of the jurisdictions here to fact check me. So scary, but good idea. So Parker did send this report to you earlier this week, so I'm just going to cover some of the high points so that we reserve enough time on today's agenda for the discussion that's going to be coming up. So the report that you'll see here has three major sections. It'll compare Seattle and King County's audit practices. And then I looked at a few, actually I looked at more than the three that you'll see in this report, but I looked at a few comparably sized municipalities, and the ones that I talked about in this report are the ones that best illustrate the differences in practices among those that I found. And then after I cover that, I will discuss a little bit of the considerations that the committee or the council would need to think about if you want to replicate some of the practices that you see used by other jurisdictions. So next screen, please. I guess I can do it. I'm turning two screens here at the same time, so that's why it's taking me a little bit of time to do this. Okay, so this table here is a summary really of the high points and the comparisons between Seattle and the King County Auditor's Office. So the key differences that I found really are that the city auditor has final decision authority over their annual work program, whereas the county auditor's two-year work program is approved by the county council. The county auditor's work program focuses on performance audits and capital program oversight, while the city auditor's work program provides performance audits as well as oversight of policy compliance and program evaluations. So they go in a little bit different direction. The city auditor does at times publish reports prepared by consultants, usually on policy compliance or program evaluation documentation, while the county only uses consultants to provide technical support. So if they have particular areas of expertise. The county and city funding levels for both of the auditors in 2020 appear to be comparable, but the county auditor has 7 more positions than the office of the city auditor. You'll note that the county auditor does have a specific capital program oversight function and a data visualization specialist position that the city auditor doesn't have, whereas the city auditor has designated utility auditor that the county auditor doesn't have. So not a lot of difference there, but some nuance. I'll move next to looking at then the 3 municipalities that I focused on in this report. Again, these are the ones that seem to have the most contrast with Seattle. So looking at Nashville, it's an interesting organization. So they are appointed, their auditor is appointed to an 8-year term. And the appointment is involves a public-private audit committee, which has the vice mayor, the director of finance, 2 council members, a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and a member selected by the Nashville chapter of Tennessee Society of CPAs. That group will recommend 3 candidates for the office, who is then appointed by the mayor. That office then oversees the annual audit plan, concurs with the audit committee, the public-private audit committee oversees the annual audit plan, concurs with the annual compensation and salary adjustment, and conducts annual performance reviews of the Metropolitan Auditor. And that's very different than what we see here in King County or Seattle. That office also includes a fraud hotline. So some of these offices do have work programs that go beyond where Seattle and King County, what Seattle and King County focus on. In Portland, the city auditor is directly elected, which again is not how we do things here. And the auditor has authority to be able to contract with CPAs to perform financial audits of city government. In San Francisco, the controller serves as the chief accounting officer and auditor and is appointed by the mayor for a 10-year term. The audit services funding is established by charter, and much of the work program is defined in that charter. I'll talk about that on my next slide. Also within the audit services division, the audit unit manager manages a whistleblower program and also provides support to city departments to improve their service delivery. Just go on to the next page here, which is continuation of this comparison then. And you'll see on this slide that San Francisco is rather dramatically different than what we do here. So they have a significantly larger staff. They've got 75 people and a $9.8 million budget, way beyond what any of the other jurisdictions that we're talking about today have. They have a dedicated source of revenue that's equivalent to 0.2% of the budget of the city and county of San Francisco. This is the only jurisdiction that I found in my relatively limited research, but I did do some research. I didn't find a dedicated source of revenue for any other municipal auditors. The charter, as I said, gives San Francisco a very detailed work program, and they are responsible for auditing all departments. The auditor can decide the cycle in which they do that. They also have some mandatory work they have to do each year for street and sidewalk cleanliness and other programs. So their charter and their program is very, very complicated, very thorough, and pretty expensive. So finally, then I wanted to include in the budget report kind of an early snapshot of things that council would need to think about if they wanted to move the city auditor in any of these directions. So whether affecting issues of independence, work program authority, or resources. So I didn't look in depth on policy issues or legal authority or risk associated with making any of those modifications. It does appear that council could likely implement many of the changes in those areas through ordinance. Specifically, though, converting the city auditor to an elected position, I believe, would require voter approval of the charter amendment. So that's a very high-level overview of that background report, and I will turn it back to the chair for any further conversation if you want on that.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Lisa. I have one question, then I want to turn it over to everybody else. But one of the jurisdictions you just talked about, I don't remember which one it was, had a dedicated funding source.
Right, that's San Francisco.
Yeah, is that just like a dedicated portion of the general fund, or is there a specific funding mechanism, like a specific type of fee or tax or whatever that is that source?
The document I found said that it is 0.2% of the budget. And so I don't know if that's just general fund budget or the whole city budget, but I can find out for you.
Okay. Thank you. That'd be good to know. That's kind of an interesting way to do that. All right.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
I'm sorry. This is Dave Jones. Just one factoid. In terms of dedicated source of revenue, the Washington State Auditor's Office also has a dedicated source of revenue. They're not a local government entity, but they have a dedicated revenue source, and I can't remember what it is. It's some percentage of a certain revenue stream.
Okay. That's really good to know, David. Thank you for that. Okay, are there any other questions or comments here? Looking at the whole gallery of participants, or trying to actually, hold on.
Just so that I can understand, this is Estella.
Okay.
On the oversight question, if you could just go over Seattle's oversight in, relation, I can't remember now, does it report to the city council? Just so that I understand that a little bit better.
And I could certainly do that. I council member, how do you feel about asking Mr. Jones to just answer that directly? Since he's the one who has the individual relationships with the council members on this.
Yeah,
either way is fine.
Yeah, David, do you want to maybe take that question away? I think that is a good suggestion from Lisa.
Sure. So the city auditor, Ms. Ortega, the city auditor is appointed by the city council. And then what traditionally has been done is oversight of the office is delegated to a particular chair of a particular council committee. Up until recently, it was usually the chair of the finance committee, the finance committee. But for this particular, the latest iteration of the council, it has been assigned to the council president. So it's council president, Lorena Gonzalez, is responsible for monitoring our office. So what I do is I have periodic meetings with whoever the individual, the council, whoever the council member that the council decides, should monitor our office. And then I, from time to time, produce status reports that I send to the city council. And our office is required by the city charter to produce an annual report. So we have to produce an annual report, talk about what we did in the previous year. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, and I appreciate that, just so that I have a good understanding.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, any other questions from folks that want to jump in here? Yes, Levon. And I think you're muted, Levon. Still muted, it looks like. Parker, is it possible that people that some of our panel, okay, there, you're not muted anymore, Levon.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a minor thing, but Portland is complicated by the fact that the auditor has multiple functions, including the ombudsman's office. And I started a fraud hotline, but it is managed by the ombudsman's office. It's still in existence. So technically Portland has a fraud hotline. And I started when I was the auditor of Multnomah County, and that's set in the county auditor's office. So just two minor little things.
Great.
This is Bob Thomas. I have a comment to make.
Yes.
And it has to do with the comparison of use of consultants between Seattle and King County. King County, as the slide shows, does use, at least, I think it's still true, use consultants for on technical matters. But they have had, this is actually some of them since the time that Cheryl Broom was serving there, have had some major studies that were pretty much 90% consultant work, or extremely large portion, but and so it's still technical assistance, but the bulk of the work was done by consultant teams, sometimes multiple firms. And what distinguished what King County did was that King County still took ownership of those. All the work was done according to government audit standards, and that the reports that did go out were still products of with the report covered everything of the county auditor's office. So they're still county auditor products. They were seen that way, and they met the same standards. And so technical assistance in some cases, on some projects, yes, but also there have been major studies that have been pretty much contracted out, but still with the auditor's stamp of approval and following all the standards. For Seattle, and David knows this better than I do, but there have been studies where that haven't been completely contracted out, where the consultants have been providing technical expertise and who have participated basically as members of the audit team. So they're both a little bit more in common than the slide would suggest a big difference. So I don't know how many study, what percentage of the studies of the consultant work that a city auditor does that is completely it's someone else's product. But a couple that I'm aware of, the consultants have pretty much been contributors to a team, and it's been a City of Seattle audit product that's produced.
I appreciate that. I talked to Kim Waltmanson, and she was the one who characterized the amount of or how the consultants were used in her office. So I understand what you're saying, though.
Could I offer a comment?
Yeah, I was about to say, David, if you want to jump in on that.
Sure. And I don't know if there's a hand raising functionality in the software, and there probably is, and I apologize for not knowing where it is. Otherwise, I'll use the manual. I guess the basic difference, and I wanted to say this because it came up a little bit earlier, in terms of the budget, our budget be about the same as the King County Auditor's Office. Again, and I brought this up earlier, and I'm going to keep on bringing this back. You know, a big chunk of our budget in recent years has been for what you could characterize as consultant dollars, but it's major program evaluations that the city council has directed our office to oversee. In other words, to select outside, usually academic experts, to do very big evaluations of major public policy initiatives. So there's a chunk of the budget, you know, this year it's like $500,000 for 2020, and I think last year was $800,000 for things. So yeah, we have a big consultant budget, but that's really for council directed evaluations where our office has been told, go select somebody, usually an academic researcher or team of researchers, and here's the money for you to pay them to do their work. So that's, you know, the vast majority of our consultant dollars. However, we have from time to time used consultants to help us on audits. And quite honestly, just speaking as city auditor, I'd love to have more resources to be able to do that. But we have, if you look at our discretionary consultant budget, it's tiny. And so that's just a distinction to keep in mind. And I hope if you have any further questions about that, I'd be happy to answer that. But again, we have these major pieces of our budget that are for consultants, but we've been directed how to spend those dollars and what for. And it's for work done by, let's say on the sweetened beverage tax and the secure scheduling legislation are the principal ones. And years ago, the minimum wage ordinance, where you know, we are just directed to select somebody and oversee the contract and give it to them, and then it's their work, and we're supposed to not have much to do with it other than making sure, you know, that it's a product, a high quality products delivered on time. So that's just a major difference in what King County does and what we do.
Sure.
I have another question. This is Estella. I was wondering, and going back to the oversight, when that work is being presented to the council president, is there any special reporting on how you know, the audit relates to whatever you're auditing on race and social justice impacts?
So when I meet with the council president to talk about what work we're doing, and hopefully I'm answering your question, there's not a specific part of the meeting that deals with race and social justice that's called out as part of my agenda when I meet with him or her. However, if you go and look, and I'd be more than happy to provide you with a document that lists multiple reports our office has done on race, on topics that involve equity and race and social justice. And our office is maybe the first, I think we were the first office in the country, local government audits at least, to have developed a race and social justice initiative form, which we use. So every time we start a project, it forces us to think through the RSJI implications. But to answer your question, if I understand it correctly, no, there's not a portion of that meeting that's devoted to talking about that RSJI. However, a lot of our work touches on that, and I think more and more of it will, because equity is a huge consideration. And just one little fact, I think in King County's code, it explicitly says that the work of the King County Auditor's Office will involve equity issues in addition to the traditional efficiency and effectiveness, cost saving stuff. And our language in our code doesn't say that. However, we do a lot of work in them, and I'm very proud of the work we've done. And if you'd be interested in any details on what we've done in that area, I'd be more than happy to provide that with you. But I hopefully answer your question. I probably told you more than you wanted to know, but
no, it's good. And I would definitely like to have a one-on-one meeting in that way.
Sure.
So what steps should I take to have to coordinate that?
You just ask me and you tell us when and where, and I can get the folks in our office who've actually done the work on that. And if you like, I can also, and I can provide this to the committee too, sort of a summary of the work we've done on equity issues in recent years. And, also provide the members with a copy of the form if you want to see it. So any information you want on that, just let me know, and I can, do it one-on-one, give it to the whole committee. Just let me know and we'll make it happen.
I'm sorry, I'm just beginning to learn people's names, so I don't see you on the screen talking. So I'm sorry to ask, what's your name?
My name's David Jones.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Great. Are there any other questions based on Lisa's presentation?
I have one. This is Sharon.
Okay. Yes.
I have a quick one, and I appreciated the memo report that you did earlier, Lisa. There's a footnote about emerging strategies for performance auditing and referencing the Nashville function being one of the top performing auditors. And I looked at that report and I didn't see an explanation of why they were considered one of the top performing auditors as it relates to performance auditing. Did you see any information on that would give us some ideas of what makes for, most effective performance audit shop?
I remember looking into that because I was kind of mystified myself, and I don't think I saw anything clearly, but can I get back to you on that? I'll look into that a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And that was actually a question I had too, Cheryl, so thanks for bringing that up. All right, I think that we're good to go on to the next broader exercise here, and that is our discussion that's going to be around considering the specific benefits and challenges associated with performance auditing, and it'll be really formative to kind of how we structure the rest of our work as a group. And so, Lisa, do you have that slide deck handy? Hold on.
Yes, it's going to take me a minute to get it all set up properly.
Perfect. So this will be, we'll have kind of more of and we sort of started touching on it a little bit based on our comments on Lisa's memo, but we're going to have kind of this like more freewheeling conversation that's going to be guided by this this matrix that Lisa's put together that she is going to make changes and updates to in real time, so we can all kind of track along and just kind of figure out where we want to spend our resources and priorities as a group, and then really listen to David Jones and Lisa Judge on what they perceive would be helpful too for making the work of their offices be able to to maintain impact and the mission that they've been assigned. So once that is up, we can get into that conversation, and I think it should be a good dynamic exchange that can be informed by keeping track of our thoughts and really having a detailed document we can refer back to and really see really see how we're making progress on this and ultimately form the bones of an eventual report. So there we go, good timing.
Okay, so I'm just going to, I need to get my cheat sheet up too. So that I have, all right. And Parker is a technological genius and helped me figure out how to pull this off because I was trying to print off my notes and ran into technical difficulties. So we're trying to do it this way. Okay, so this is the discussion section. This could be very interesting, I hope, for you all. Discussion section really to talk about what are some of the benefits and challenges of performance audits? What are the trade-offs when using consultants? When would you want to? What could be challenges there? We do have some discussion also about transparency, about what are some of the tools that can be used to provide that increased transparency and to what audiences. And then also, as Parker noted in his email to you, we're hoping to sort of pick your brains about what kind of best practices have you seen professionally as you've been working with your counterparts across the country. Who's really got performance auditing nailed? You know, who's doing the best work, and what does that look like? So, so I'm trying to replicate really. Pretend that I had a large whiteboard and I could just be scribing, you know, and taking down your answers as you discuss this. It'll be a little bit more cumbersome than that, but that's really the intent of how this should go. So this will be the first set of questions to you, and there will be a slide for each of these topics. So the resolution was formulated to call out specific elements of performance auditing that they wanted you to consider about what would be benefits and challenges relative to efficiency, effectiveness, equity, increased revenue, savings, innovation, or any other topics. And so we'll start by talking about efficiency benefits. What do you see as the benefits? What can, let me just get my notes to myself. So in what ways can a performance audit improve efficiency? What items or actions could block or negate improved efficiency from a performance audit? So those would be the questions on the table to the group, and I will be a scribe, try to be a live scribe as you're sharing this information.
So who wants to maybe kick us off and kind of share some of their thoughts here on you know, benefits or challenges as relates to efficiency? And you know, maybe even, you know, David or Lisa or some of the other auditors on here too, for some of us who are, you know, I mean, I have my my government auditing standards, you know, handy, but I'm still a layman. And
Very nice, very nice.
And you know, so like it was years before I kind of had a good understanding of kind of the differences between, like, you know, efficacy and efficiency. And if anyone wants to maybe start with maybe just breaking it down, you know, for those of us who aren't, you know, aren't professional auditors on this panel, that might be a good way to begin, so all of us can kind of jump in this efficiency conversation and get some of our thoughts on the board here.
So, council member, this is Lisa Judge. I was just hoping to get a little bit of clarification about what we're trying to get at in terms of efficiency. Are we talking about our own operation and how performance auditing helps our internal efficiency, or are we talking about it in terms of achieving greater efficiency for our auditees?
Both. Well, mostly it's your I think it's achieving efficiencies for how the departments that you're auditing or how your clients perform.
Yeah, and I think the thing that springs to my mind most about a benefit is it can be very targeted to particular concerns that are perhaps expressed by community, maybe even the auditee agency themselves, or observed issues of concern that the audit entity perceives. So it's the ability to really go in and focus on a particular issue rather than having, you know, the scope be much larger.
Thank you. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to call for if anyone else wanted to jump in.
So I'd like to talk, am I on?
You are.
Like it, we can
Thank
hear
you.
you.
About the challenges of the point that Lisa is making there, which I think is a really good point. At least in my experience, and I'll admit that it's been 5.5 years since I've done any auditing at all. But the staff often in whatever organization is being audited don't see that inefficiency, and so it manifests itself. So the challenges manifest themselves in ways such as not being open to making the change, not understanding what the benefits are to some improved technology, and some improved outcomes. And some of that is, at least in both of the organizations where I audited, and then I was also in charge of the audit shops, there was a lot of resistance to that change. And so that's, and I mean, that may seem obvious to everybody, but it comes from staff who just, and not to criticize or name call, but long-term staff, they because of change at the top, and this is particularly so in the city of Portland, they become survivors, and so they just survive until the next whatever council member is in charge or whatever changeover at the top, and so they sort of dug in their heels and aren't willing to take the information and improve their workplace and improve their outcomes. So that's a lot of verbiage for something that's pretty obvious, I think.
This is Lisa Judge again. I appreciate that. And, I think part of that equation is that inefficiencies develop for a reason. I think that they become habits for people, or, they involve shortcuts in ways that people just adapt their jobs to their own particular likes or dislikes, and then it becomes the established protocols. So I think to also be Captain Obvious about this, human beings don't like change, and anytime you come in and point out inefficiencies that change habitual behavior, it's hard. So
I'd maybe add to that to Justin Marlowe on the challenges related to that, to kind of build on that point. Data and systems so often get in the way, and that makes it difficult from an efficiency standpoint, both for the conduct of an audit, but also to be able to develop recommendations, to implement recommendations. If data are siloed, if staff aren't used to working together, it can be very difficult to do anything from a real solid evidence base. And it can take so much time just to collect all the requisite data to be able to carry out an audit in the first place, that you're often left wondering how much more work could be done, how many more audits could be performed if there wasn't so much time spent simply getting the information in one place. And there's certainly lots of tools and lots of ways to kind of cut through that inefficiency, but it seems like a lot of the time auditors are running into those systems that were really not designed to be well coordinated or efficient in the first place, and have to contend with that in a much more direct way maybe than those who are delivering services every day.
Hey, this is Sean. I would, I guess the one thing I would add, just because we're talking about audits in the public sector and in the public eye, that oftentimes, to the point around them being targeted at given departments, a lot of the things that at least I experience through my membership at the city that are pain points are not public facing, they're internal, and as a result, they don't get the external scrutiny, and the politicians involved don't necessarily get pressure put on them by the public, because while they're part of the integral function of the city, they're internal. And but most of my members who work in this environment, they're not the ones that people are going, hey, you're not filling my potholes, right? They're the ones that are processing payroll or dealing with an outdated HRIS system. And when you're talking about spending, limited dollars, they tend to go towards the things that people are seeing when there's a lot going on behind the curtain that leads to those inefficiencies.
I'd like to speak to the benefits side, because I think there's a lot of benefits of doing performance audits and looking at efficiency areas. And in terms of an audit process, auditors can go into much more depth often, and they will independently document and analyze what the efficiency issue might be. They can take it to the next step of assessing what the impact is, what the difference would make if changes would make. And they don't have to work in silos in terms of just one agency. They can track it through and show how different agencies can improve their processes and the way they manage an agency or program or service, and provide some technical assistance in saying, this is how you could do it differently and why, and this is how the system would allow that or not, or we would make recommendations that you change the system in this regard. And Bob could talk more about how with increased understanding of what the problem is, that auditors will share by sharing their documentation and their analysis, you can get further along with implementation of those changes and impact efficiency.
If I could chime in and I guess go back to the negative a little bit, sorry for that. I think it's also important to point out that even though efficiency is a laudable goal, there's a cost to efficiency. And so, I think even pointing out ways in which an agency could be more efficient may involve some initial outlay of money, resources, things like that. So sometimes it's hard to also get the auditee to accept certain changes when they come with a cost.
Hi, this is Estella. Obviously I don't know, what the process of city audits are like. I just know what audits are like within our organization. And I have to tell you that I was taken by the small budget that city audit department has and the number of staff that are associated with it. And I just, it just makes me wonder then, with a small budget and the amount of audits that have to be done, to me, I see that as a problem, because it just doesn't seem to me that there's enough money and that there's enough staffing, and you have your staff just working and working. And yes, they're not going to want to hear about efficiencies because they've got a job that they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Amen.
Amen.
Do you want to move on to the next topic?
Yeah, I'll do a last call here, maybe on efficiency. This was a great conversation, so I don't want to cut it off prematurely. If anyone else has anything they want to throw into either of these columns, otherwise we can go on to the next one, because we do have a couple more to cover, but I didn't want to cut this one short. If anyone else had a last thought on either column of efficiency here. All right, I think we're ready to move on, Lisa.
Okay. So now we'll talk about effectiveness. And so just to kind of get a definition, it's just, are your outcomes, are you better able to achieve your outcomes because of a performance audit? So that would be how I would consider effectiveness in this context. Can you provide any examples of how a performance audit could improve effectiveness? What might it prevent a performance audit from achieving the outcomes, the intended outcomes? And there can be overlap with what you talked about before too, obviously.
Can I make a comment? Yeah, I didn't say anything about efficiency because often there's like a kind of an overlap with people talking about efficiency and effectiveness, and and I think some of the points that Cheryl Broom got to could come under the issue of cost effectiveness as well. And then, but the way I look at it is that the term cost effectiveness probably covers both at the same time. And cost effectiveness would be, there's two aspects to it. One is to say, are we doing, given what we're doing, can we do more of it for less money, or can we, for the same amount of money, could we get more out of it? So effectiveness in that sense, which also gets to somebody's senses of efficiency, but cost effectiveness also gets, or just effectiveness also gets to the questions of whether we should be doing the thing in the first place, not how well we're doing the thing that we're set out to do, but does it make sense, like as a program, does it make sense as an initiative? Is this how we're going to operate? And I think performance auditing, I like the term, the combined term, cost effectiveness, that covers all of this. Performance auditing gets in